Hello, everyone. My name is Patricia Kong from Scrum.org, and I'm going to welcome you to our Scrum Pulse today on Actionable Awareness. We have our professional Scrum trainer, Mark Wavle from Insight, who's really going to talk about what he's described as a reflection model to increase awareness and impact. So he's going to go through a thinking tool of some of his thinking around this. I actually am excited to get the chance to participate because this is something when Mark and I have talked that is really powerful, I think, not only from a coaching stance, but also when we think about leadership and leading and how we interact with others in teams and organizations. So I'm going to give a quick intro. Please feel free to put your questions in as we go along, and I'll be taking those to Mark during our time together today. Let's spin forward. And who is Scrum.org? Well, that handsome man on the screen, he's Ken Schwaber. He owns Scrum.org, and he created Scrum.org several years ago. And I've had the opportunity to work with him for a while. And what we've really been focused on is what you see here. So we're a mission-based company. We think about improving professionalism and helping people and teams solve complex problems. I generally break that down into the notion of training, education, and community. So you guys and Mark Wavle, part of the community, and really sharing that education, lifelong learning, ongoing learning, and then this notion of assessing that learning to take that forward. So consistent global community, consistency is something that's really important to us, and we're global all around the world as much as we can be today in this virtual aspect, and community is such an important part of that. So just some logistics for today. We're going to, again, be taking questions as we go along, so feel free to pop those in. There is going to be a part that's interactive. So there's a couple interactive parts where we're going to say, hey, can you participate in this poll? Or, hey, we have some tools that we can offer you here if you're interested in finding out more, and we can send you some access to that. We're going to be asking you to submit there. So just some things that are upcoming. From here, I'm just going to kick it over to Mark. I'm going to be listening like y'all, and we'll be asking questions along the way. Take it, Mark.
Awesome, thanks Patricia, and welcome everybody. Glad you came today, and I'm looking forward to this too. My name is Mark Wavle, as it says here. There's my email address. If you did want to contact me, feel free. I'm the National Agile Lead at Insight Digital Innovation, and I've been involved on or with Scrum teams for coming up on 12 years now. In a couple months here. Started out as a business analyst and then joined my first Scrum team, like I said, about 12 years ago. And since then, haven't looked back. Enjoyed it too much, didn't want to go back, and have been doing Scrum Mastering and Agile coaching and training. As Patricia mentioned, I'm a professional Scrum trainer, so I get the privilege and the joy of doing training before COVID, traveling around doing training, and now virtually. Doing that. I'm also in my spare time in my personal life. I'm a musician, I'm a worship leader at a local church. My wife and I have adopted a couple kids, and between the two of us, we have lived pretty much in every quadrant of Ohio that you can. So I'm very much an Ohio boy. So happy to be here with you. Definitely want to give you a quick introduction to Insight as well. And in addition to our technology solutions, which are quite broad, we have Agile offerings, as you can imagine, a very deep experience and a breadth of offerings, and we really strive to meet everybody where they're at and help them find the next level of agility for them. And something we just absolutely love, it's at our heart, is we say everything we can do, we can teach you how to do. And we want really to help everybody own their own agility. You're experts in your context, and we want to help you take that next step and the next step after that, and learn how to take the next step as well. So that's really where our heart is. Before we go any further, before I get into how I got here, how this topic came to be, I would love to understand a little bit about you and where you're coming from. So we've got a quick poll here just for you to identify what your current role is, and that'll help me understand where you're coming from. So if you just go ahead and pop in there, indicate what your role is, if it's Scrum Master, Coach, Product Owner, maybe you're a member of a development team or a manager, or perhaps a different role entirely. Got a lot of people voting here. I'll give you another moment or two. Okay. So looks like the vast majority of you are Scrum Masters or coaches. We got over 60% of Scrum Masters or coaches. We got good representation of product owners and leaders as well, managers, and then several others, which just makes me curious what your roles are. But part of the reason I wanted to do that is because I want to tell you that the context I'm about to share with you, like the backstory basically, and the examples I'm going to share are going to sound very much Scrum Mastery, because that's where it was born. For those of you who aren't Scrum Masters, don't let that distract you, because this is really about helping teams and people who are interacting together do that better, improve the way that they're doing that. So if you work with people, I'm guessing all of you do, this is going to be helpful to you, definitely. So the context might be a little different for some of you, but I have found this to be pretty broadly applicable. So my backstory of how I got to this spot, how actionable awareness was born, is that I was coaching at one of our clients, and I was working with one specific team, and I had found that, I had done a number of things, but my influence was just kind of hitting a wall. Like I was getting significantly diminishing returns on the things that I was trying to help them with. And that I was just trying to figure out what was going on. Why was I hitting this wall? And at the same time, I was also coaching a Scrum Master, helping them grow into being a Scrum Master, a brand new Scrum Master. And I was struggling with how to help that person learn some of the skills and perspectives that are needed as a Scrum Master. And out of essentially that set of cognitive dissonance, this stuff was born. What I realized for me was that I walked into these situations with a toolbox. I had a bunch of tools in it. That's a toolbox, not a coffin, in case just for clarity. My drawing might not make that clear. So labeling it, that's a toolbox. And to make it clear, let me draw some tools for you. So I have my favorite hammer, right? It's well worn. I've used it many times. And, I've got the screwdriver of different types. I've got different types of saws, right? I've got all these tools in my toolbox, and I've got really familiar ones that I like to use. You might even call them friends that I just pull out all the time, and I go like, oh, how'd that hammer get into my hand? Because it's my favorite tool to use. Or maybe there's the new shiny tool. I remember the day I learned about liberating structures. Thank you, PSM2 class. And I was just like, for 6 months, every problem looked like something that liberating structures could solve. And as powerful as liberating structures are, as powerful as these tools are, I was driving from the wrong direction. That was part of the reason why I was limiting my influence, was because I was driving from the tools, the shiny or familiar tools that I wanted to use. That was one of the things that was leading me where I was at, and also it limited my ability to help this other Scrum Master grow, because I could teach him tools, but when do you use those? When are those most effective? Because there's a bunch of these things. Wow, that was a great question, right? That's where all this was born. And while it was born out of my brain pain, it was created. What you're about to see was really created in community. And you'll hear me refer to community a lot in here, just like Patricia did about the PSTs. We have a strong Agile community at Insight. When we are with our clients, what we're trying to help them do is create their communities as well, because that is critical to our growth. And that's true of this set of thinking tools you're about to see here, that the Scrum Masters, the coaches, the other trainers I've worked with, we've all worked on this. I get to be the one up front getting, hey, I get to show you this. There's a lot of people who have been part of this, and it was born in community. So I'm excited to share that with you. Here's what we have come to, and what we've found are kind of the diagnoses of that problem. The first problem we had was an awareness problem. I really had a problem with awareness with this team. When I was walking into interactions, whether they be the daily Scrum or a hallway conversation, I had a problem where I only saw what I was looking for. We're really good at this, by the way, only seeing what we're looking for. This is kind of a natural thing for us to do, but it was limiting my influence. The next problem I had was an analysis problem, is that I assumed I knew why things were happening and what was important about those. And because I'm really smart and experienced. But my next problem was action, though, and that is that I used, as I said, the tools and techniques I was comfortable with. So each of these by themselves is a bit of a problem, but when you jumble up the order of them as well, it becomes more of a problem. I just described to you I often would start with the tool. and kind of that would leak back into the awareness and analysis. I've got this liberating structure. I love Troika Consulting, want to use that, right? And I could find problems that could help with. And it's not that it didn't help with that. It's that I maybe wasn't aware of what the things are that were actually happening or what was important for me to address. And it might not have been the thing I was trying to solve with Troika Consulting, for example. So that was really limiting my influence or impeding my influence, as I put it on here on the slide. So for us to shift to enable better influence for us, the things that we've discovered that we needed to get better at, that we needed to improve, is our ability to be aware, to observe what's really happening, not just the things we're looking for. And then building on top of that, we openly consider our interpretations. What are the possible reasons these things that I'm observing might be happening? And then based off of that, what kind of impact am I trying to have? What's most important? Let's consider that carefully and then select the actions that are going to help with that. Now, everything that I've said to this point, anytime I've talked about this, I have yet to find anybody who says, oh my gosh, I've never heard of that. Like nothing that I've just said is shocking, I would imagine, to any of you. These things are all seem pretty obvious. And even what I'm about to draw up here, the order that we do them in seems pretty logical. We should have our input data really good, right? And our awareness. We want to get that nice clean input so that we can do good analysis on clean data, so we can select actions based on good analysis, based on good data. I mean, it all seems very logical. So what's the big deal? What's the problem? The problem is this is hard. We are wired for the things on the left. And I'm not trying to call that stuff necessarily bad, even though that's what it looks like here. I'm trying to call this out as it's caused problems many times, and we need to consider if that's the best place for us to be all the time. Our brains are wired for the things on the left side for quick assessment, analysis, and action, to the point where we don't even realize it's happening many times. This is oftentimes a good thing. If a bear is charging me, this is not the time for me to observe. I wonder, wow, that fur looks really soft. I wonder how long those claws are, right? And this is the time for me to see that there's a bear charging and run. And I probably haven't even thought about that. I just react, and that's good. Or when I'm driving down the road and I see suddenly there's a car spinning out in front of me, which has been an unfortunate reality for a situation I've been in, this is not a good time for me to be, oh, look at the color, that yellow of that car is, I've never seen that color before. And I think their left headlight's burnt out. That's not the time for that. So there's good purpose for us to have this wiring in our brain. What I'm suggesting and what we've learned is that the things on the right are not our default setting, but they are a set of skills or muscles that we can build, like a core strength that we can build. And then once we have that set of muscles, that core strength, we can choose when it's best to use it. And I would suggest to you that many times, especially with teams and interactions that we are familiar with, we could use a good dose of things on the right side to enable our influence and enable really the benefits we're trying to bring, the teams, the people, the organizations we're working with. So that's where we're going to spend our time, is on the right side here. And we're going to walk through each one of those step by step. Now, I've just made it sound really hard, because it is. So why would we want to bother doing this? Let me quickly run through some of the benefits if you're not already kind of sold on those. Some of the things we've seen, it deepens insights into situations. I'm sorry I'm using my company name, but I know no better word for it here. It's just there's nothing to replace walking into a team's retrospective and saying, here's what I've seen. This is what I've observed, your interactions, or maybe to a leader and say, here's what I've seen, the way you're interacting with. It's very strong coaching opportunity at that moment, or even just to reflect it back and say, what do you all think about that? That is very powerful to be able to do. So it deepens your insights for your benefit and analysis, but also for other people. And being able to have that depth of awareness builds connection and trust. This is a set of tools, for example, that I've used in sales calls before, to be very deeply aware as much as I can be of what's going on, and to be able to have some reflection of that is just a tremendous way to build connection and trust. And it's what I want too from other people. It increases the impact of your interactions, as I've been calling influence the whole time here. And I've referenced how I used it as a teaching tool. This is great. I've learned by doing this. And I've also helped others learn by using the same set of tools. So it's a tremendous set of tools for those things. teaching and mentoring. We say we love empiricism as Agilists. This is an important way for us to practice it. As a Scrum Master, as a coach, I take actions that I think are going to benefit. Am I looking for the transparency? How do I see transparently so I can inspect if the benefit's there, if I'm having the impact that I think is important? This set of tools actually helps you do that. So it's really great from that perspective too. And I didn't even do it for that reason. I was like, wait a minute, I just helped myself with empiricism. Yay. And of course, if you're doing empiricism, well, then it's going to enable continuous improvement of me as a coach or Scrum Master or leader. And it's going to enable the teams and the people I'm working with to get better too. What we've done here is we've produced a tool, and I'm going to walk through awareness, analysis, and action for the rest of the time together. And I'm going to give you, a little bit of context for each of them. We're going to walk through a first step you can take just to essentially like start to build a muscle in this area you might not be as familiar with, a new muscle. And we're also going to talk through some additional practices you could add on very quickly. Talk about that at the end of each section, like a next step for you. But what we've got here is we've got a PDF of 3 canvases. They're very simple. It's this thinking tool concept here that will help you put into practice the first steps we're going to talk about for each of these. So if you would like that, feel free, put the please send tool in the question panel. I'll get it to you after the session. And I'll show you as we're going through each of these picture of that page of the tool, the canvas, essentially, so you get an idea of how that could help you just kind of walk through the situations that we're in there.
Awesome. They're coming in, definitely. So I'm going to try to see the other questions. There is one question mark, just foundational. Is this inspired, or is there any underlying research from Theory U, which is change management out by MIT?
I'm writing that down to go look. That's great. I'm a very curious individual. I have not looked into Theory U. I will say, though, I will cite some of the things that have been helpful in this. If you're familiar with nonviolent communication, the observation portion of that is really helpful for awareness. It's a very similar concept. There's also some behavioral science aspects that are in here in awareness and in action as well. So those are some of the influences.
Awesome. And for those of you who are curious, Theory U is there's a book actually by Otto Scharmer, I think, and that's out from MIT around change management, learning and management. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good intersection. I'm looking forward to reading that. So let's dive into awareness, the first of the 3. We're going to spend most of our time out of the 3 in awareness because this is your input. In my experience, if we improve the input, even if we're not trying to improve analysis and action, it's just by having better input, it's going to improve those things. Not that we're not going to talk about them, but you'll start to see I step on the gas pedal when we get to them. Because if I were to recommend you invest in any spot, it would be awareness. It's the biggest bang for the buck and a great starting point. So what's our analysis problem? Let me illustrate. This is something that I've already talked about, but just to illustrate it so you can get a clear visual picture of it. We usually walk into the situations and interactions that we're a part of with a set of assumptions like brick and a set of conclusions like another brick. Often we're not even aware of it. Very often we're not even aware of these things. Subconscious is not intentional, and especially true if we've worked with a team for a while. It's what we believe is true. And sometimes it's what we believe must be true. Notice how that's a much stronger set of words, and I'm grasping my hands because oftentimes that's something that we're going to hold on to and say this has to be true for some deeper reason inside of me, like a value, something I value very deeply. So when we walk into situations with that, especially when we're unaware of them, and then especially when we're holding onto them so tightly, this must be true. What we do when we're seeing things happen is unintentionally, we are gathering evidence to support what we believe must be true or is likely to be true. We're gathering evidence to prop up those assumptions and conclusions. Again, I'm not trying to say this is intentional or mean-spirited or anything. This is the way that we're wired to work. This is pattern matching. This is how we're made to operate. What it can do, though, the downside of this is it can blind us to things that are going on around. We're literally putting on blinders, and we're looking for things that support our conclusions. We're seeking confirmation. And yes, if you're keeping score at home, I'm talking about bias here. I'm just not using that word. This is a type of bias that we all walk into. And so we're really bad at seeing things we aren't looking for, is what it comes down to. We're really bad at seeing things we're not looking for. And it's really easy for us to filter, and it's really easy for us to distort the things we're looking at in order to try and support our assumptions and conclusions. And this is blinding us to things that would benefit us and the people we're working with to be able to see. And that's the awareness problem that we have. To put it another way, what I consider successful awareness when I'm walking out of a situation, I'll ask myself is, have I been surprised by anything? If I have, I'm going like, okay, so I was improving my awareness. And if I haven't, I go, maybe I need to try and open my eyes and take off the blinders a little bit. There's a quote by Isaac Asimov that I really love about this. And I love the animation I get to use because he's talking about windows. Okay, his quote is, your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off every once in a while or the light won't come in. Here's why I love this. We're not calling assumptions bad. We're wired that way. We're going to look through windows or glasses to see the world. And our brains are made to do pattern matching and make assumptions and so on, so that we can make decisions quickly when we need to. Every once in a while, we have to consider those assumptions. We have to take off our glasses and go like, oh, I could stand to clean those, right? If we don't do that, then we're going to over time diminish the light that's coming in, the input that we get. And that's transparency in empirical language. We want to be able to use this set of muscles in awareness to have better transparency. So let's go from principle to practice. What am I talking about? In practical terms, I'm talking about observation, even clean observation we'll get into here in a minute. Some people will call it reading the room if we were together in a room, which we're not today, but if we were, that's what we would call it, as reading the room. So it's things like what was said, literally what words were said, who said them, what's the volume of what was said or the tone that it was said in, what's not said, what's unspoken, missing, body language, expressions or lack of expression or spacing. And you're starting to see with these later ones that this is more and more of a challenge virtually, especially when many people don't even turn on their cameras for our interactions. You're missing a lot of this information, and that makes it really hard. I'll give you some hope at the end of this section here where actually that can help you hear and see some things that you might not otherwise. But we have to work hard at this regardless of whether we're in person or virtual. And the more we can head towards these types of things that we have up on the screen here, the more we have clean observation. What I mean by clean observation are things that a video recording or an audio recording would capture. Or another way of putting it, another way we say it is something that's provable in a court of law, something you could submit as evidence in a court of law. So it's not conjecture. And we tie that back to the problem statement I had about awareness, and that is, these are the things that can help you clean off your assumptions and your conclusions and just get back to clean observation as much as possible. To also help us see that a bit more, let me show you some things that can pollute our clean observation. So you can see where we can unintentionally, very subtly sometimes, bring some of those assumptions and conclusions back in so that we can, if we can see those, we can clean those off in our awareness portion of this. We'll bring them back in analysis, so don't throw them away. They're not horrible. We just don't want them right now. So here's 4 common polluters to our clean awareness, our clean observation. The first is an inside view. This is where we believe we know what's going on inside somebody. It's not actually something we can observe. The second is connecting cause, where we believe we know why things are happening, even though that's not something we could prove in a court of law. That's an assumption on our part. Evaluation is the next one, like the good, bad kind of evaluation. We're judging something that's going on. Again, not provable in a court of law. That's what we're bringing to the situation. And the last one is exaggeration. Again, something we bring into the situation where we make something bigger or smaller than it is. So to dive a little deeper into each of these. The inside view is assuming things inside someone that's not directly observable. This is usually thoughts or feelings. So if you are observing and you're saying so-and-so thought this, you can't actually observe that. That's an assumption on your part. So what is it that you are seeing? That's what you want to write down. Or so-and-so was angry. That's not actually an observable fact. You can observe things, actions that they are taking. And so let's step back to that. We can bring back the assumption of anger when we get to analysis, and I'll show you how we handle that well in that spot. But right now, we just want to observe action. So here's an example, pretty much like what I just gave. Manesh was angry with Sharon. This is an inside view polluter. We don't know that Manesh is actually angry. That's maybe a good guess. But in awareness, what we want to do is clean that up. What are we observing that leads us to believe anger? And so a cleaner observation might be Manesh clenched his jaw, Manesh raised his voice, Manesh pounded his fist on the table. Those are things we can actually observe. And so that's the type of awareness we want at that moment in time if we're trying to get really clean observation. The second type is connecting cause, assuming there's a causal relationship between observed actions, and the key word here to try and avoid is because. That's the one that says you're assuming that you know why something's happening. Manesh raised his voice because Sharon shook her head. Again, I can't actually prove that. The way to clean this type up is you're probably observing time, and time can be actually observed. So the order of things happening can be observed. Oftentimes we would be able to observe this as Manesh raised his voice after Sharon shook her head, or Sharon shook her head and then Manesh raised his voice. So we're trying to clean it up and not assume that I know why Manesh raised his voice. In this part of it, we're just going to take what we can actually observe. That cleans it up for us. Evaluation is the next one. We judge an observed action with a label or a comparison, and the words here are commonly are good or bad or too much or too little kinds of things, like Manesh spoke too loudly. For who? Yeah, that's a judgment that it was louder than it should have been. And as soon as I say it that way, you can hear the word should, which is a judgment type of word that we're going to set aside for this phase here. So we want to clean that one up and say Manesh spoke louder than he did before, maybe. Or you can observe that somebody else is taking a step back when he's speaking louder than he did before. Those are things you can actually observe. And finally, exaggeration, over or understating. Always, never, and hardly are some of the favorite words in this one. Manesh always argues with Sharon. I'm observing this interaction. I'm not observing all Manesh-Sharon interactions right now. I'm just observing this one. So I can't actually say always. I don't know that. I'm not with them all the time. Even if I am, I'm only in this moment, and I'm going to say Manesh is taking some action. And you could even argue with me, and I would probably agree with you, that argue may be a judgment or an evaluation or an inside view, perhaps, as well. So we could clean that up even more. But those are examples of it. Okay, for those of you keeping score at home, again, yes, those are biases. I'm talking about biases with a different word, polluters, to make it interesting today. So let's take some examples here. Let's practice this for a moment and take an example observation and see if we believe this one might be clean or if it's polluted by one of these four down here. So take a look at this one. Jose was annoyed with Shauna. You think that's clean? Or do you think it might have one of these four polluters in it? Just take a look at that for a minute while I take a drink of water. All right, lock in your answers. There's no scoring here today. Here's my assessment of that. Jose was annoyed with Shauna. I don't actually know that Jose was annoyed with Shauna. Annoyed is something that could be going on inside of Jose. What I can observe are some of his behaviors. Maybe he rolled his eyes after Shauna spoke, something of that nature. I can observe an action. I could prove that in a court of law, for example. So that one's got a little bit of pollution in it, but there's an interaction where I see Shauna doing something, Jose doing something. There's probably some time relationship, and I can actually write that down and observe that. Let's take another one. Oh, Jose rolled his eyes. That would be a potentially cleaner one. Again, with perhaps some time connection to something Shauna did that I could write down for later analysis. How about this one? Kayla mentioned the team working agreements twice. Does that seem clean to you? Or does it have one of these four polluters in it maybe? Jeopardy theme music is going on in the background. From my view, this one is pretty clean. This is all factual. Who took an action, mentioned, team working agreements, and 2 times. Okay, that's pretty clean in my view. Looks pretty good to me. All right, last one for our practice here. April constantly interrupted everyone. Clean, or does it have one of our 4 polluters in it? This one to me looks pretty exaggerated. I see constantly, probably an exaggeration. It would be hard to actually constantly interrupt. And everyone, it's possible, but it's likely though that I think that that's an exaggeration. So what could I do? April interrupted Steve twice. And maybe she interrupted somebody else too, and that could be an observation I could make. So we're trying to get ourselves back to things that are factual, and so that we can set aside our assumptions and conclusions for a minute. And what we've been practicing is this first step. What I would recommend you do to start to build this muscle and improve this core strength is clean observation. Capture clean observations of at least one situation. It helps if you're not leading the interaction. It helps maybe if you're not familiar with the context even. So maybe you want to observe a different team's daily scrum or another interaction of some sort, and write down or type up your observations. If you don't do that, you can't inspect them. So make them real so you can look at them. And then, as I've been saying, you capture things like a video or audio recording would, or things that are provable in a court of law. Now in that tool I've been telling you about, the PDF, it looks like this, which is probably the simplest canvas you could possibly have. You just have some areas for observation. An example one up here, when Nathan spoke about the service design, Patricia swiveled her chair to face away from him, crossed her arms, and did not speak. Different Patricia, totally. And you got some prompts over here of what you might want to observe, like we talked about earlier, to help you, get some ideas of what you want to look at there. So once you practice that, some other ideas very quickly to go through here. You can focus on one sense, close your eyes, turn off the audio for a minute, and you'll be surprised how your brain refocuses on the other senses, right? If you turn off your audio, you're going to find things that are happening visually you wouldn't have seen if you hadn't stopped listening, basically. So just switch your senses around. Confirmed observation, you could try and reflect some things back and see if people are seeing it that way or not. And my favorite one, because it's community involved, is get an outside observer. Is there somebody else who can observe the same thing as you? There's no better way for you to see like, oh, I guess I did assume that, or I didn't see that. When did that happen? That's a tremendous learning experience if you will pair observe something and compare your observations. So that's awareness in a nutshell. Let me pause real quick and see what, if any, questions or interaction we want to have around awareness. Patricia, do we have any good, juicy questions around that?
I think it's just some good, maybe clarifying questions. So when you're talking about observation, you're talking about us being silent observers in this kind of experiment, rather than really coaching people to come out of these polluted scenarios, yeah?
Great questions. So to build the muscle, to build the skill, I would recommend that you try being a silent observer for a while to build that. Take some opportunities to do that. Would I say that that's where you would want to stay? No, not at all. Not at all. I wouldn't expect that you'd use this to just observe and then analyze and then choose your action after every interaction, right? It's going to be the kind of thing that you can build up the ability to, in the moment, be, as I say to Scrum Masters a lot of times and leaders, be near but not in all the time, to be able to take those moments to take the step back and become more broadly aware, and then to be able to choose the moment, do a little analysis, and step back in and take some action. An example being like if there's escalating conflict and you're stepping back, you're seeing that it's escalating, you're observing what's happening, you're analyzing after the observation that it seems like it's headed in unhealthy directions, it's getting very personal instead of about the issue, it's becoming about the people. I would hope you wouldn't sit there as a leader or Scrum Master back, go like, all right, let's I'll think about this later. And you may want to intervene at some point. So it's intended though for you to build up that skill. Start with, yes, silent observation to build a skill, but then use it in shorter loops, basically.
Awesome. Just a quick question, and then we're excited to get going. Is the clean awareness somehow linked or inspired by David Grove's clean language? Any inspiration there?
Wow, I'm taking all sorts of things away to go look up. No,
Yeah, I'm just
not
saying
that I'm
good
aware of.
template.
That's a great
Thank you
one.
for the reference. All right.
Yeah,
I'm going to
that's
save
it.
some of these for after we get through, I think, the last steps.
Okay. As I mentioned, we spent most of the time there. I'm going to step on the gas pedal a bit for analysis and action, because I think if we slow ourselves down here, these other two become a bit easier. Um, so let's hit analysis. Once we have better inputs, we want to openly consider our interpretations. Here's our problem. Let's say we've done a really great job. We've got some really clean observation. There may be some nirvana that takes place in the future where we have absolutely no preconceived notions of any situation we walk into, even a team we've been working with for 3 years. That's not where I'm at. That's probably not where you're going to be at if you're starting on this journey. You're still going to have those assumptions and conclusions around, and what we're trying to do in awareness isn't just demolish them, but like I said, kind of put them on hold. They're kind of holding their breath off to the side. I wouldn't expect them to just completely disappear. They're holding their breath, but they're going to have to gasp for air at some point, and that's the analysis section. It's okay to bring them back in. The question is, how do we hold them when we bring them back so that we are openly considering those things and not grasping onto them like they must be true. So how do we handle them in a way that helps us with that? This is the analysis section here. The tools we've got for this are to express them openly. Just like I said with awareness, write them down, become aware of them consciously and express them, write them or type them or something. Because if you don't do that, then you can't inspect them. Another tool we'll talk about in doing this so that it's openly, so that you're, as I like to say, holding them with an open hand, is to use the word wonder. State the assumptions and conclusions in a way that's like, I wonder if this might be the reason. I wonder if Jose is angry with Shauna. So that was my assumption in the observation, but I set it aside and it held its breath, and now it's okay to bring it back. I just want to hold it with a wonder instead of that must be true, or I assume it's true, or obviously it's true, or whatever the case might be. Let's hold it openly. Once we do that, then we can explore alternatives. So I wonder if that's true. I wonder if there's some other reasons why Jose might have done the things that I observed him do, rolled his eyes after Shauna spoke. Or maybe it wasn't related to Shauna speaking, right? We can wonder about those things. So that's holding it openly in ways that we can inspect. And then once we've done that, consider what the impacts and importance of these things might be. These are possibilities. So these are a bunch of ways to look at possibilities. I'll put this in the first step for you and show you the canvas. One, write down your initial assumptions about the situation you observed using the seed phrase, I wonder if. Once you've done that, then you can identify alternative possibilities with I wonder if, very open-handed. And then you can consider those impacts. What could be the impacts if these things are true? And identify the most important items. There's a lot packed into analysis, and I am flying through it, I understand. I'm mostly emphasizing the first two for the sake of time here. This is how it looks on the canvas, just to give you an idea. I wonder if. So we talked about Patricia swiveling her chair away from Patrick after he spoke, crossing her arms. Now, my initial assumption I worded as, I wonder if Patricia and Patrick had an argument before this meeting. Maybe I have some reason to believe that, or it's just what popped to mind first. Fine, so I write it down and I'll own it. I wonder if that's true. What are some alternatives? I wonder if the swivel timing was coincidence and maybe Patricia was reacting to something completely different. Maybe she got a text message or somebody else in the room did something. Maybe there's something else that happened. I wonder if the two had previously discussed this topic, if they were kind of preloaded for this conversation. And you could go on for a while. Those are two examples. Once we've done that, what are some possible impacts of this? Things like maybe in this case, productive conflict resolution or psychological safety impacts. The solution quality might be lower because Patricia's not participating in the solution design discussion. I don't know. And again, you could go on for a while on that one. And finally, the priority. I know I'm flying. There's a lot of meat in here. The priority is to say we're probably going to observe a lot of things and have a lot of possibilities here. What do we feel are the most important things now that we've looked at this? And let's narrow that list down so that we can really focus, Scrum value, our efforts as a leader, as a Scrum Master, as a coach on something that's most impactful here. Let's practice that one real quickly here. So grab a piece of paper and a pen or pull up Notepad on your computer or something of that nature so you can type something down or write something up. And what we're going to do is I'm going to feed you this observation. So assume you were observing a team doing something, and there was a person there who was silent the whole time they were there. Okay, write a number 1 on your paper and start, I wonder if, and then write a number 2 and say, I wonder if. I'll give you a second to do that. All right, beside the number 1, I wonder if, and complete that sentence with what's the most likely reason that just comes to your mind why that person was silent the whole time. Just own it, the first thing that pops to your mind. Okay, now, you know what I'm gonna do next because I've already told you. Beside the number 2, I wonder if, what are alternate possibilities? What are some other possible reasons? You can just start a list right there. What are some other reasons why someone could be silent in an interaction? All right, I could let that go for a while. Based on the times that I've done this type of exercise, we can come up with a healthy list of possible reasons. You know, my first assumption is probably when I've had this happen, when I've seen this happen, is someone's mad or scared, maybe. Those are oftentimes my most likely reason that pops to mind first, but other possibilities, maybe they're sick. Maybe they didn't sleep last night and they're not able to form a word at the moment, maybe just fighting to keep their eyes open. Or they had a fight with their teenage child this morning and they're just flooded at the moment. Or maybe they ate a whole pizza for lunch and the carbs are just slamming them right now. Or maybe their inputs or views were already expressed by others in this interaction, and so they don't have a compelling need to open their mouths and say something in that. And the list can go on. Again, I've done this exercise enough to know you have a decent list there, and if we combined our lists, it would be just absolutely impressive. Point being, all you know factually is that they were quiet. That's factually what you got. There are a myriad of possible reasons, and so you want to hold openly your first assumption. It's not horrible, it's not bad, it's just a possibility is the way we want to hold it, and then look at alternatives. And that's how we can do open analysis that will actually help us and the people around us. And once you've practiced that a bit, some other things you can do to help: reflect first, walk out of your observation and go, what am I most curious about or concerned about or excited about? And that can help you decide what to focus on in your analysis section. You can identify some unknowns. We usually start with what we know. Maybe just flip that around. What do I not know? That's a tough analysis, but that could help you. You know I'm going to have an outside perspective on here as much as I love community. So get someone outside of the context to review your observation canvas, your journal that you wrote down observations on, and see what pops to their mind as things that they are perhaps most concerned, excited, or curious about, or some initial assumptions that they've made. It can get you unstuck, because oftentimes the wiring we've got, it's real easy to get like in that rut where we feel like we know the answer, especially if it's people we're familiar with. So get somebody else to help you. Give their perspective. I love community. Also consider the impacts on agreed standards. This is a great place to bring in things like working agreements, definition of done. If you're using a Scrum framework, what's the intent and purpose of this, the value of this interaction if it's a daily Scrum, for example. And that's a great spot in the analysis to say, now that I've done clean observation, what's the impact on those things? Are we getting the value that we need to out of this, or is this impacting the value of those things? Compare and contrast to the baseline. Here we go with empiricism. So if I've done this observation before, an analysis is a fine time for us to pull back the previous observations and say, how is this one different? How is this one similar? And that can provide us a tremendous amount of insight that can feed into good analysis. And also very empirical impacts of previous actions. We haven't gotten to the action section, but imagine for a moment that you had done previous observation analysis, you'd taken an action with the desired impact or outcome, which we'll get to in a minute. Now you've done another observation or two and you come back to analysis, you can pull that back up and say, I did this, I was hoping for this impact, am I seeing it? And there's a good empirical loop for you as a coach, as an Agilist. All right, so that is a fly through of analysis. Before we get to action, are there any burning questions, Patricia, that we want to talk about here?
Mm, there's a lot in how much I am loving this. One of the things that I'm obviously I work a lot on something called evidence-based management, and this really speaks very clearly to me. One of the things that I think about and I point out is this notion that when we are coaching, we're scrum masters or we're leaders, we have all these assumptions that we make. So it's generally in terms of our whole entire experience. So we bring that package and we say, you know what, I know how to approach this problem. Right. So that's what you were talking about, the assumptions and awareness. And that gets us to this place until we do something like a reflection like what you're talking about here. One of the questions that came out that kind of piggybacks off of that is that generally have a history or relationship. You might want to bring up the bias word here. Do we leave that information, the patterns, the behaviors out? Do we try to leave that out, or should we? Are those experiences valuable or not to consider? And I would say, and I'll leave the jumping pad off here, but when we talk about things like empathy, we have our lens and another person has their lens. So it's just understanding where they're coming from. So I think that's valuable. What do you think?
Absolutely. What I'm suggesting is that we try and set those aside until we get to analysis. Which again, if we're doing it to start out with, might be for the whole interaction as we're trying to learn it. But as we get good at this and we can do this cycle faster, then that can happen relatively fast but consciously. That we're going, what am I seeing right now? Right? That's the awareness is right now, what's happening right now. And then in the analysis, consider previous observations, right? And previous interactions, and consider those things with an open hand so that we don't jump to a conclusion just because somebody is acting a certain way today, that it is necessarily tied to the previous interactions. It might be, it might not be. Let's consider that openly. So that's really my call. It is absolutely valuable. And that's a lot of the value that we bring as coaches, is our experience with teams, right? Is our experience in similar situations or even with a specific team. That's a tremendous value for us. It's, can we set it aside momentarily to see what's going on right now and then choose how to handle that in a healthy way as we're analyzing the situation.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's take a quick run through action. This section here is going to be the fastest, and part of that is because I think this is the one where we have the most stuff already as leaders and as agilists. What you would go search for on the internet, if you will, you're going to find a lot of tools out there, and I think most of them fall into this territory. It's no dig. It's just, these are the things we can see. These are the things that we can learn pretty quickly, and I think we have a plethora of options in our action tools. I think we need to, that's why I say we focus on awareness, because I think there's a growing set of tools there, but it's just simply not as easy to find those tools and to practice that stuff. So for me, the question when we get to action is more a question of filtering. What's the best way for us to filter out our tools to select the best one? And I already told you my story of loving liberating structures and using that tool as the tool for everything. I think the key here for us is this impact or outcome. I know those aren't exactly synonymous, but I'm using them in the same territory, so to speak. But that's how we can select the best tool to use. And if I just jump to our first step recommended that you'll find in our tool, our canvas here, for the most important items in your analysis, so end of analysis, we picked the most important things for us to be considering and trying to impact. For those items that we're focused on, let's start with the desired impact or the desired result from taking an action before we consider what the action would be. And let's express that. Shockingly, I'm going to say the same thing here. Let's actually express that so that we can inspect it. And then from that point, what's the most effective action, or as I've been calling it here, tool you can take and use to have that impact. And again, I say jokingly, for those of you keeping score at home, it starts to sound like a hypothesis, and it has some elements of that. That's intentional. You are building your backlog, your coaching, Scrum Mastering, or leadership backlog, however you want to look at that, by identifying these actions with the intended impact. And This is, again, a pretty simple canvas just to help you think through those things, express them, and be able to inspect them. So maybe for Patricia and Nathan, my desired impact is that they'd be able to listen to each other's perspectives about the service design. Maybe I'd want to say they'd be able to listen and reflect. I don't know, but that's an impact or an outcome I'd want, and then it's an action I could choose to facilitate a conversation with them where they expect to express and reflect each other's perspectives about that service design. That's one based on the possible reasons, this is how I could choose to act. Again, I think we have a lot of things we can choose from here. I'm just throwing a few up here just to go, don't forget, Management 3.0's got a whole set of liberating structures I've already lauded in our conversation. Professional coaching has a set of tools, and the list goes on. There's lots of them. In the Professional Scrum Master class, the PSM class, we've got a toolbox of things for Scrum Master, and three that I love to pull out here are stances, teaching, mentoring, and coaching. For example, my favorite coach stance is a tool is reflection. As I mentioned earlier, hey, this is what I've been observing. And I can even essentially in reflection ask the group, the person or the team to look at that and what's your analysis of that? I'm curious to see what you think about that and what the possible impacts of that are, if any, how important that is, what action you might want to take about that. Like that's super strong coaching in the coaching stance when I'm doing that. Of course, as we learn in PSM2 as well, you have to be able to have the tools of things like get help, escalate, intervene, those kinds of things. I hope we're not having to use that a ton, but we certainly have to be able to do that if we need to. That needs to be in our toolbox. So that's a possible set of actions there. But the one that I think many of us are flummoxed by, if I will, if I can say that, is that we can choose to learn more. Maybe we've observed something and we're not sure. We still get to the spot where like, I don't know what the likely impacts are, or I'm not, I'm still holding these possible reasons and I don't know. So it's possible for you to do a learning loop. Well, okay, maybe observe again is the best action you can take, or you can check your assumptions, or you can inquire with somebody, or reflect something back and see what others think, get some outside perspective. Those are all valid next steps for you. Of course, trying to balance, just like we would with helping a Scrum team balance their spikes and their value delivery. You're gonna have to balance those things, but that is a super valid action there. All right, so advanced action steps, so to speak. Measure your impact. Shocker here. What could you actually measure that will indicate that the action's having the impact that you stated that you wanted to have? And if we build on top of that, gosh, we actually have a hypothesis statement. I'm pretty much pulling this right from conversations that I've had with Patricia on evidence-based management. I believe by taking this action, it will have this impact, which will be observed by this measurement. So you could actually write them as hypothesis statements if you wanted to, and that's a tremendous way to build your backlog. And then another action possibility or perspective is environmental enablers. I'm pulling this straight from behavioral science. How could the environment be shifted to support and enable the desired behavior? That's just straight out of behavioral science. That's good stuff right there to consider for your actions. Who do I need help from? All those kind of things. All right, so let me close real quick here. Just three final thoughts that I want to make sure you're left with this taste in your mouth. First, start by slowing down. We've talked about that one a fair amount. The intent is for you to stay slowed down all the time. I think we've talked about that one enough. The second one that we haven't talked about is look for the positive. It's easy to assume that we're talking about negative things we need to correct. And there's certainly an aspect to that. You are gonna, don't forget, look for the positive things. You might get just as much, if not more, bang for your buck in actions by reinforcing what you see or accentuating what you see that's helpful, that's positive, that's healthy and beneficial. So look for those positive things and don't, I have a tendency, I wrote this down because this is where I often end up, that I've forgotten to look for that. So don't forget to look for the positive things and act on those. And as I've said, it's better in community. Having people that you're doing this with, that you're learning from, will help you become more self-aware if you want to learn that way. And it's tremendous self-awareness tool here so that you can be better others aware so that you can take better actions. And that's what we've discovered by doing this type of thing in our Scrum Master development, in our Scrum Master development program, which is empirical and lean and an agile approach for us. Happy to talk to you more about that. And even if you don't want to know more about our approach for that beyond this, I just offer that tool to you again. right? Feel free, happy to offer it to you to just help you take those next steps in building up that core strength of becoming more aware of what's really happening and openly considering your interpretations and selecting the most impactful actions to bring benefit to the people you're working with and the organizations you're working with. All right, let's we got look at that, 5 minutes. Let's see what other good questions you have or other things people say, is this related to, and I write down so I can go learn about it.
Honestly, Mark, I am so happy that I got to host this session, so that I could experience and think about all these things. It was really great. There's and that means that I get to flip a question for you. So there's a question in here, and let's see if you can do this in 1 or 2 minutes. I'm going to flip this into a different way. So in the scenario where we're assuming that a product owner wants to just be the influence over the Scrum team. I don't know what influence means here, but instead of the Scrum Master, trying to guide the team, how could we take this model, right? And maybe you just want to start with the canvas or the I wonder if, how would you break down for someone to start thinking about those ways using the thinking tool that you've proposed to us today? Let's try to do that in a minute or two.
So I think what I hear you asking is, I've used mostly examples of Scrum Master or maybe a leader or manager of the team kind of thing. What if we look at it from the perspective of a product owner? How might this be applied? Is that a?
If you're outside the team and you're saying, you know what, that product owner is just trying to be the Scrum Master and just instead of letting the Scrum Master express themselves and work with the team.
I see. Okay, so if that's an observation you've made, I see where you're taking that. So if we have an observation, that first of all, that's an analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can see the Scrum Master taking actions, and then you're noting those down in awareness, and then in your analysis, you're seeing that some of those things, like we're pulling up that standard of the Scrum framework, we're going, wait a minute, those things seem to fall into Scrum Master role definition territory, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be kind of, if I slow that down a little bit, that would be where I might have gotten to that spot where I say, that seems like the product owner stepping into somebody else's role territory. Actions that we could possibly take about that, I think having a good role conversation would be one possibility, right? Is there a role definition conversation we've already had, expectations? You could also just talk to the product owner or talk to the Scrum Master. What I would love to do in that is to really create this strong relationship or foster, enable a strong relationship with the product owner and the Scrum Master, so that the product owner might have tremendous awareness of something is going on that the Scrum Master could be missing. So maybe they're able to pair up on some of these things. I remember one of my favorite Scrum Master roles, that it was because the product owner and I could be so well connected, and she had some really good Scrum Mastery type of observations and ideas, and I was able to do some similar things in product owner area, and we were just like the dynamic duo, so to speak, but we had to have the conversation about it and with the team as a whole about how we wanted to operate well, so that was most effective, and we could reflect on that and see how we could get better at it. So that was kind of a rambling view of it, but that's what comes to mind for me. Is that hitting on what you were where you were hoping that would go?
I had no
No preconceived notion.
Yeah. I know that was great. I think on the fly that was just really just taking that kind of scenario and adding these was really great. And like you said, I think obviously for enterprise and leadership stuff about evidence-based management. So I've made a ton of notes about how we think about, being empirical, about goal setting, how we work together, the assumptions that we all have, and what transparency means. So this has been really helpful for me and from a lot of people who are watching. So this will be available for everybody after. And like I said, Mark, there's a couple slides right here. There's a lot more information where everyone can find some more information from Scrum.org, different webinars like this, our blog, our forums, different learning paths, a lot more information that we as a community are sharing with you. So again, thank you, Mark Wavle, for taking this time with us today. It's been a pleasure for me to learn a lot from you.
It's been a blast. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Scrum on.